Good evening and welcome to the latest edition of Blood Brothers podcast, episode 88. Tonight we're all three of us again, which is becoming a bit more of a regular thing. How are you both?
Very good, mate.
Good. And I say that, I don't know if it was all of us last week or not. Tonight we are joined by Robert Goddard. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes.
It's nice to have you. And you're here to talk to us about many things tonight, but your new book, This Is the Night They Come For You, is out on the 24th of March.
Yes.
Or what was out on the 24th of March, I guess.
Wait, what day is this?
So congratulations. Please, can you tell us and the listeners a little bit about it?
Well, it's a mystery story that is really rooted in the complex and troubled past of Algeria. A subject I've always, well, not always, but for quite a while, wanted to handle in the context of a mystery novel. And it was really a process of finding the characters that would be the best way into the story. And I think I've done that. And it is, it's quite a labyrinthine journey that many of them are going to go on in the course of this. But that's inevitable because the history of Algeria is nothing if not labyrinthine. I mean, the past 50, 60 years in Algeria, they have been difficult.
You say you've been wanting to tell a story for a while. You've been wanting to tell the history of Algeria in a story for a while. Has this story been part of that process, or has this finally become the vehicle through which you can express that history? Well,
it's just been a subject that's interested me, partly because it's fairly neglected in this country, and there's just so many ramifications to it and so many ways in which it can affect characters. And so intriguingly complicated at times and so difficult at times to determine exactly who is doing what and for what reason. And I'm sure if you spoke to Algerians of a certain age, they wouldn't reach any agreement on who had been doing what and for what reason during that period.
And well, that was kind of my question: is how much did you have to cut? Where did in the beginning of the plethora of input, where do you even begin to hollow this into a story?
Well, I suppose I entered the story via the character of Nigel Dalby and his being sucked into a plot in Paris by adherents of the Algerian regime at that time, or rather those who were trying to topple the Algerian regime at that time. It's always difficult to keep track of exactly who was doing what, but he was the character that I sort of entered the story through, and then at the other end of that, I alighted upon the Algerian police superintendent Taleb and his Secret Service equivalent Iducci as two people who would embody both the past and the present of Algeria in their equivalent struggles, really, to come to terms with what has gone on over the decades.
Yeah, they take the shape of that sort of shifting struggle so well that, you know, it's like, as you say, who's doing what and to whom, and who's to be believed and who's to be trusted.
Well, the answer to the last question is no one.
Like every great mystery. Yes, trust no one.
Like every great moral for life. Even
yes.
I mean, Taleb, because he is older, has ended up surviving by sort of sardonic indifference, which is ultimately not quite enough to carry him through. And Iducci, on the other hand, still has some kind of illusion that a final truth can be carved out of this mess, and that's what they're both aiming for. And they come across other characters as well. The nightclub hostess Abdurrahmani is a favorite of mine in this story, really, because she is somebody who she and Taleb understand one another very much better than just about anybody else in the story.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a genuine affection in the way that character's depicted, that you're like, oh, you've enjoyed writing those scenes.
Yes, at some point when she arrived, I realized she was going to be accompanied by a parrot. Of malign intent.
Oh, thank you. And you brought your parrot. How delightful.
Yes. Could I ask about the research, Robert? I mean, was all the research for this? Because I learned an enormous amount reading this, and it's to my shame that so much of this was, as you said before, I was unaware of, or my education to this point hadn't serviced me with the information here. You know what I mean?
The French, we know much more of this, of course, but it's because I think we tend, an enormous amount of attention is devoted to the legacy of Britain's imperial past, and a lot of people seem to have the delusion that Britain's the only country with an imperial past, and I'm afraid in Europe there's no shortage of them, and France is another one with a very troubled history. If not in some ways more troubled, particularly in terms of its current difficulties.
Yeah.
Was all the information there for you already? I mean, were you know all of this already, or
No,
did you have to deep dive into this for the finer details?
Well, I'd read quite a few books about the actual War of Independence. It was really the period after the War of Independence that I had to research, and particularly the 90s, which is a terrible period in Algerian history, worse really than the War of Independence, because at least in the War of Independence, I think people knew who they were fighting against, whichever side they were on. But in the 90s, they didn't even know who was trying to kill them or why they were trying to kill them. You know, it was just an horrendous time, really, which bred the motto "Who is killing who," which was relevant at the time because there were so many false flag operations and devious maneuverings were going on, all of which involved people dying, basically. And I think now what you see in Algeria is at least until recently, a country that certainly for about 20 years after the 90s, they were just so exhausted by what had happened that nothing happened. But more recently, a younger generation has come up, and Bouteflika has been removed from power, and you see change beginning again. So we've sort of gone through a generation of exhaustion, and we're now re-engaging with the subject.
It's interesting because it wasn't so much a generation of apathy as you say. It's just I'm exhausted now with this, and it takes the young blood to find a pride and an emergence and a desire to create an identity that can rise out of those ashes, if you like. But there's a sort of late. I mean, I'm speaking as a South African. There's that lay period of post imperial and post Civil War and nobody knows really which side is on the right anymore, because so much has come beyond and so much has come through, and whose land was this and whose second or third generation what, and there is a moment of deep breaths and pause where nobody can really, there's no fight left.
Well, exactly. And I think that's certainly the period after the 90s. I think many people were also worn down with the fact that in the 90s you literally didn't know who was doing certain things or even why they were doing them. You know, it's a very difficult situation to exist in. So we have with the character of Taleb somebody who's at his own level of suffering during that period, and he just doesn't want any more problems. Naturally, he's not going to get his wish there, but
No. Why would you ever grant a character that kind of wish? Tis.
They've got
work to do, sir.
What he really wants at the beginning is air conditioning, but he's
yes.
Oh, don't we all? Bloody hell.
Yes.
He might have a chance where air conditioning is concerned, but that will have to be revealed.
Is that sitting there in your godlike authorly and go, air conditioning or an easy life? No more problems or air conditioning?
He doesn't really want to retire. He only thinks he does.
Yeah. What does he know?
Yes. And did he arrive with you fully formed, Robert? You know, like did it take work to bring to sort of bring Talib to life, or did he arrive just, this is who I am? I'm I'm taking this role in your book, and
I think it was fairly straightforward to know what a person who'd been through all of what he's been through would feel like at this stage in his life, and I didn't. He's not. He's still doing things, but he very much feels that he's a back number, and the director appoints him to this particular job because there's no one else. Although his relationship with the director is also an ambivalent one. He's not held in contempt by the director. The director knows that actually Talib is a better man than him, and he's not a bad man himself either. He's just had to compromise to achieve certain things. I didn't want the director to be some kind of idiot or some kind of monster. But
I found that really refreshing. There's a sort of not necessarily unspoken, but very muted mutual respect that goes on there, and it's so refreshing to not have, you know, the archetypes that we've become so used to. And here you go, right, here we go again. Now we all know who to like and not like, and I just think, you know, having two people who are more than competent but more than worn down is it's quite a lovely way to look at a relationship between people.
It was just what I needed to read at this point in time, because I've just started writing the spectacularly stereotypical police chief who's a bad piece of work. So I needed this to go, hang on, you know, don't fall into those old tropes and categories. But yeah, I really love their relationship.
Good, I'm glad about that, because I wanted that to work. I mean, it's Talib has a number of relationships. He even has a relationship with the man who runs the garage where he parks his car. I mean, but that little thing itself is a reference back, because at a certain time in the past, it wouldn't be safe to park your car on the street. So people in his position would hire a parking space in some off-street accommodation, which was secure. And so that is a reference back to the 90s, really, where it would have been an act of suicide for him to park his car on the street, which is something you would otherwise think about.
Wow. It's all that, those tiny details that made me question how much of a personal relationship you have with the Algerian history, or how much of that you've
relationship. No,
I just, you know, when you suddenly go, is there an imperialism conversation that was there a grandfather involved here?
I'm aware of no personal connections with Algeria.
Thank goodness. I'll call off the family tree hunters right now. It's just, I think what I'm trying to say is that the history and the attention to detail is so beautifully peppered in, but not hammered and labored. And I see it so much in works where it's very clear that the author's done a hell of a lot of research in order to bring this story to life, and now they're reluctant to let anything go. And what I find so delightful to read as a reader is a fantastic story with everything in it, where, as Rob says, you're learning and you're understanding and you're getting different perspectives, and there's all sorts of layers that we will never understand, like the parking on the street, and unless it's explained to us. But it's just so rich, and I love that, the ease with which that comes across.
Well, I did do a lot of reading, or as much reading as I could. It's not actually that easy to do a lot of reading about post-independence Algeria in the English language. You know, there's not that many books, but some of the stuff is it's amazing, really, that so many people have survived it all.
Yeah, I think that is the key. It's there's a lot of anecdotal history that's there to be had.
And there's one question that I always find interesting to ask, and I'm not sure whether the people I ask find it interesting, but it's the question of tackling COVID in your works, in an author's work. So some authors I've spoken to have said, I'm not going to put it in at all. and you just tackled it head on, Robert. Just like acknowledged it as the, you know, as the part of life that it is. But were you ever swayed to go in another direction with it? Swayed to ignore that it was happening, or?
Well, I'm always precise about when things are happening in my books, so it would be ridiculous to claim the story was happening in 2020 and there wasn't any COVID. So we know that's not the case. So
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't want it to be important in the story. It's just every now and again we have a bit of a reference to not many people on the streets, or he's wearing a mask at some point or another, but it's not particularly significant as a feature. I did have to check up on what the Algerian COVID regulations were, which naturally I didn't know.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be somebody on Amazon who knows exactly.
Well,
And I found it entirely unbelievable.
the references were so fleeting.
Yes, yeah.
This is the way to do it. Light dusting of COVID references. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, when they get to, we probably should have been a bit more extreme when we got to Paris, because at the time the French were extremely strict about everything. But we can't keep going on about who's wearing a mask and who's not.
No, of course not. If I could just delicately ask the question about your career in a wider sense, Robert. I first was made. No, in the sense that my grandfather was one that picked up on your career very, very early on.
This is a worrying.
No, this is what in the late 80s.
So Rob does look a lot older than he actually is.
No, my grandfather had all your books until he passed away. So I remember when I was first getting into reading, etc., myself, and I was first allowed into his library of thrillers around the age of, it would have been in the mid-90s. Yeah, I remember your name very fondly on those shelves. So it's wonderful to meet you today for a little personal level to myself, because when I was finally allowed to go on those shelves to get something out, it was a really big moment for me.
Well, I'm sorry that your grandfather is no longer with us.
Oh no, it's a long time ago. But he was a big fan. He would have got a big kick out of his grandson having a chat with you today.
I mean, okay, I have been writing books for quite a while now. I think we can say that. I don't know when it became a career. At some point around about probably novel number 6. It's an evolutionary process. I've become more ambitious in certain ways about how to tell stories and how to construct them, and my brain has got used to developing ideas, and I enjoy it, and it's gone on, and I like it going on. I like it going to the next stage, and we've got to this stage, so there'll be another exciting stage beyond that.
Brilliant.
Was it always there, even as a teen or a child? Did you have a sort of passion for telling stories?
Yeah, I think I did. Yes, I was always making things up, basically.
Yeah, I think because my mother always accuses me of, being able to spin a yarn at any dinner table from about the age of 5 or 6, and they would never really know whether I'd made it up or whether it had actually happened. But the more farcical it became, the more they realised that this could possibly have happened at school.
My grandmother did this in her later years, and she was a completely unreliable narrator of her own past. How unreliable only became clearer to me later, but she was very entertaining in the way that she would elaborate stories, all of which I assumed at the time were actually true. But
that sounds very much like my upbringing. I had an uncle who was RAF, South African Air Forces. He could tell a story about anything at the drop of a hat. Anybody would turn up and mention something. Oh, and there's a story that rolls. I mean, he's, coming up 90 now, but he can still pull a great story out of nowhere. And I think we always had that. It was an oral tradition, again, growing up in South Africa without any electricity. When I was a kid, you're sitting around telling stories. That's what you are going to be doing. And when we finally got electricity in 1985, you suddenly realise you've got nothing to plug into the generator. So then point having electricity, you carry on having stories around. And I think we always did it, and it's just stuck with me, that storytelling thing.
I think the stories start out as the truth, and then we embellish them.
It's never good enough.
And then we improve them, and then at some point, and I've certainly found this, I've been genuinely uncertain about whether something I have related is actually true, even though I think it is. I thought, well, have I altered that in telling? It's difficult to be certain, really, of anything. I mean,
it all gets very quantum.
But it makes you understand how difficult it must be for the police to establish the truth of an event where more than one person is involved, because it all starts to go wobbly after a few days, doesn't it?
Yes.
To interview 3 different people about what the person looked like, to get 3 different, suspects in the first place.
Yes, we had that fascinating conversation with the writer Adam Hamdy last year it was, and he was telling us about this little area about a 1/4 inch in your brain that one in I think it's 1 in 4 people don't have, and that's what controls your acknowledgement of a lie or not. So some people say something and they don't actually know whether it's a lie or not. They can convince themselves so much of its truth. So yes, I could totally. So I'm looking at us here. There's 4 of us on this call now. What's one of us? One of us doesn't have that thing.
Definitely Sean.
Definitely Sean.
On the sort of topic of I guess the times, because this is your 30th novel, isn't it?
It is.
Which is amazing.
Magnificent.
We had a Twitter question from Alison O'Leary, who said she absolutely loved Past Caring, which was your debut. But how have you noticed the publishing industry change, and how you've had to deal with certain things?
Just a bit.
One thing or
2 minor modifications.
I mean, the Ronio's out these days, isn't it?
I delivered the first one in a carrier bag. It was a chunky manuscript that I had to physically deliver. And at that time in the mid-80s, there weren't that many bookshops. Actually, we managed to persuade ourselves that what happened in the 90s with that sudden explosion of enormous bookshops everywhere had always been the case, but that wasn't the case at all. And since all those huge bookshops have vanished again, we've sort of gone back to the level of bookshops that there was when I started. Publishers, they're a pretty stable element in all this, although there are fewer of them. But they're all about personal relationships with people. I mean, there are people that I work with at the publisher that I've been working with for more than 30 years. It's in one case all of the time that I've been with the publisher. He's been with the publisher as well, and we've sort of, I was about to say grown old together. I'll just take that back a notch. We've grown together.
Grown together. Old can stay.
And publishers really want books they can sell, and they've always wanted that. And I don't think that's changed. Obviously, all of the wider ramifications of the market have completely altered the way stories are sold. The way the audiobook world has changed, the way the ebook world has come into the market. Everything has changed, apart from the fact that the fundamental process of creating and telling a story is, that's as old as time. So that hasn't changed.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think interestingly, not being swayed as a writer to try and suit some zeitgeist, but to stick with what stories you want to tell and feel able to tell and are excited by telling.
I don't think that was ever a difficult decision, because I've never really been in touch with the zeitgeist, so it wasn't really an option. Following some kind of a trend. I mean, really, I can't imagine a more stultifying or likely to be unsuccessful process than trying to write a book that you don't actually want to write, but you think might be the theme of the moment. Because
you would be amazed how many submissions I get on a daily basis of people who are doing just that.
But they might genuinely be wanting to tell that story.
I normally write this genre, but this doesn't seem to sell, so now I'm writing this. Never going to work, friend.
Well, look, I don't know what genre I've been writing. I've just been writing stories. That's it, really. It was a difficulty when I started out because there was this pressure to say what category you were in. I've sort of moved around categories, and I'm not really in one. They're just mystery thrillers, I suppose, but there isn't really a classification that quite fits that. But to me, they're just stories. That's it.
I think after 30 novels, you get to define your own classification by just being Robert Goddard.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat. I'm going to steal one of Rob's questions because I know he likes to ask it. But is there another? Even though you just write stories by your own admission, is there a genre that sits? Is there a story in you that you've always wanted to tell that everybody said, well, no, because your readership won't appreciate that? Is there some sort of gritty romance lurking in the bottom drawer that we could all?
I will add at this point.
What is a gritty romance?
We've had some astonishing answers to this question as well, Robert. We've had some astonishing answers to this.
The last time we asked this question, it turned into some kind of smut fest.
It was someone had a dream to write Mills and Boon. Yeah, so that's not what we're fishing for here, Robert. By the way.
That's a perfectly viable direction to take, isn't it?
Yes.
If I tried to, supposing I tried to write something that really didn't have much of a plot to it, let's just take that as an entirely character centered story. What would happen is that within about 30 pages, a plot would develop, because that's just the way my mind works. So it would be a hopeless task. I suppose sometimes I've rather been tempted to write a genuine work of history, an actual study of a particular subject that I've used in one of the novels in a more overtly historical way, but that wouldn't be fiction.
In a non-fiction sense.
I remember when I was writing Sea Change, which was about 20 years ago now. I thought it would be really great for if somebody would commission me to write a full biography of Robert Walpole. I thought I would really enjoy it, but nobody has.
Oh, Paul.
Should we put out a come and get me plea here, publishers? We've got Robert Goddard here. He'd really like to do. Come on, publishers.
We asked what was in the bottom drawer. It's turned out to be a biography.
It's a huge subject.
Yes, yeah.
It would take years.
Yeah, I think your current publishers might have something to say about your novel turnover at that point.
He gets a walk-on part in Sea Change, so he'll just have to be satisfied with that.
That'll do. What more does he want?
Walpole, what do you want? My impression was he always wanted a quiet life, actually. But...
Oh, and here he turns up in the latest novel.
He wanted a life of pleasure and ease, and he did his very best to achieve it. But he was an odd man of contradictions, and not at all quite what we think he was.
As you say, that's a huge subject matter. It's a huge life to take.
He was a widely disliked man.
I know how he feels, to be fair.
On the subject of, you said plot always comes about, that's how your mind works. Another Twitter question we had was from, and I'm really sorry if I mispronounce this, I Google searched how do you pronounce it. Queeve, I think, is how you pronounce it. Queeve McDonald, who writes an amazing series of book called The Stranger Times and the Dublin trilogy. An amazing writer, but he said of your last book, the plot was so weaving or intricate, I think he used. What's your process? Do you plan a lot, or do you write and see what comes of it? Because he doesn't think that's possible.
No, I do a lot of planning.
Yeah. And
yeah, I do a lot of planning. But having said that, the point at which the characters hit the plan has a big effect on what actually happens. It's all very well planning, but then the characters get together and they just alter the way it's developing. They don't respond in quite the way I thought they might, and they take a different line, and we just see where we go from that. So there's a lot of planning. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy the planning. The planning is getting more and more. It's getting more and more freestyle. I used to plan in meticulous detail. In fact, the first novel I wrote, Past Caring, I wrote a complete summary of the book, which was almost as long as the book, detailing every action and when it was going to take place and what time of day and what the weather was, and a whole lot of detail. And recently it's become a bit more instinctive.
It does, I guess, with practice. It's that you kind of go, well, we don't need that level of detail. Come on, everybody.
I often think of the Gary Player quote: "The more that I practice, the luckier I get." You know, that sort of overall thing that the.
Genuinely wondered which Gary Player quote you were going to come out with there. I thought we were going to go to his darker side. Carry on. The more I play with.
But on that topic, Robert, we've been blessed with some great authors who've come on the podcast, and they've left us, left us with some phenomenal advice to get us out of jams and things like that. You know, that because we have a lot of aspiring writers who listen in, and a lot of seasoned writers just the same. And something we get a lot of good feedback on is just the tidbits and nuggets that we sort of, I don't know, that emerge from our conversations. So, is there any sort of advice or anything, any trick that you've learned over your career that has really helped you out of a jam in a writing sense, maybe?
There's nothing better than a jam. Yeah, there's an opportunity. That's wonderful if the plot seems to have got itself into a corner, because you're in that corner, you've got to get out of it somehow. The characters will find a way. I love it when the plot leads into an apparently impossible position, because after all, the plot is merely a manifestation of real events, and therefore it can't be an impossible position. So what out of that, we will wrench what is actually going to happen to these people.
We're in the presence of greatness, folks. We got more. Yeah, we got more singers for you.
We interviewed Neil Richards way back at the beginning of this pod, a couple of years ago now. He's an old friend of mine, my former writing lecturer back at university some 30 odd years ago, and I remember him saying to me, there's no corner you can write yourself into that your characters can't write themselves out of.
That's exactly what I meant, but expressed much better.
It's just one of those things that you go, yeah, I made this mess. It's up to them to fix it.
That's great, because now, but that will change my approach when I get myself in a mix-up, or I feel like we're grinding to confrontation. Like where everything's coming together too tight for me. That's great. I'm going to embrace it now.
Good.
Grab the bull by the horns. Pull myself out of it.
Yes, we should.
These are real people, so they're going to have to find a real solution, aren't they? It's just whatever they would do. It's really quite simple. It's whatever they would do is what happens.
I think this is how people come up with those classic moments that you simply don't expect, because when backed into a corner, nobody expected Miriam to hit somebody in the face with a frying pan, but this is how she's got out of the corner. It's just happened this way. I'm never going to do it. Where did it even come from? But it's let them live, I think, is the thing. Let the characters be actually real.
Definitely.
Sorry, Chris. You go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah, go for it.
Please, can I ask about the fine art of invisible detection and your sort of experience of being on the Under the Covers program on BBC?
Yes.
How was it?
You may ask.
Was it? I mean, was that something that was completely new to you, or are you comfortable with TV, or how was it?
I am comfortable with TV on those very rare occasions when I appear on TV. No, it was an interesting program. I listened to what the people on the show said. You get somebody, one person wants to talk about some completely different book, even though they've been asked to talk about my book. That kind of thing. You just have to ride with it. But most of them enjoyed it very much, and I'm glad they did. Although it was interesting that they said something which I have heard reviewers in particular, say to me in the past, which is that it's very difficult to say anything about your books because everything you say involves the way the story develops, and it's difficult to sort of address that in a summarizable form. And I suppose I understand that, but that's just that's the density of the story you're being offered.
Yeah,
that's something I'm always very keen to, and it's taken us 88 podcast episodes for me to get my head around not spoiling books because I usually get so excited to talk about them that I end up blurting out something, and then I have to go into the edit. I usually we take on the edit responsibilities between us, myself and Sean. And if I've made a boo-boo, I offer to go and sort it out before it goes out.
The wood jet.
Yes.
It's nice to be able to do so. I mean, one of the things that I took particular pleasure from in This Is the Night They Come for You was being able to introduce, thanks to a coincidence of chronology, the small sub-theme of Tattyville in Paris, where Tatty filmed Playtime. It was very nice to be able to just insert that into the story. And actually, that was a sort of bit of an inspiration there as well, because looking at the film, which is just stuffed with extras, almost all of the performers in the film are extras, most of whose names now we don't even know. That made me think about, there are these people moving across this film set in Paris in the mid-1960s. They all have lives. They're not actors for the most part, and we know nothing about those lives. And that was one of the ideas behind the story, was to take some characters from that set and just develop their own story. Besides which, I'm a Tatty fan, so.
Brilliant. Could I ask about the again, me asking permission whether I could ask, Robert, but can I ask about the diamond dagger? What an achievement. Absolutely amazing.
Well, thanks. It was very nice of them to give it to me, and I'm glad they thought that it was something they wanted to give to me. Yeah,
it's absolutely wonderful.
Long service award.
yeah. Oh, you want to give me an award? Well, go on then. Why ever not?
Well,
the diamond. Yeah, no, I don't mind.
Yeah, I can handle the diamond. Yeah, I mean that's because that's for me. I'm looking at the names on this list, and it's just icons, one and all on there, isn't it? So to be recognised alongside such great, writers, it just must be amazing.
Well, I was thinking about that only the other day in the context of, I wonder how many Diamond Dagger winners won a debut dagger.
Ooh.
I would think it might be quite a short list, which is just an insight into how people's careers develop or do.
Yeah.
Yes, that is very interesting, actually. Yeah. There's hope for us yet, boys.
Hey, there's no hope. I haven't won a debut dagger either.
Yeah.
The race is not always to the swift.
Yes.
I'll be more the tortoise.
No, that's great. What about the current landscape of the mystery and thriller writing world, Robert? Is there anything that you any books or a series that you've read recently, or you've been keeping on top of that you've really enjoyed?
I don't read much fiction, to be quite honest.
Oh, right.
I spend so much time reading in order to write my own fiction, and I mean, you must get this with writers. We're not, we like writing rather than. So I'm not a voracious reader, and the last series I sort of kept up with was the Zen novels of Michael Dibdin, and sadly, Michael Dibdin is no longer with us. So I'm a bit behind, really.
It's interesting. We have spoken to a number of fiction authors who, in the time of writing, can only read non-fiction and can't focus even on reading fiction, or find it too distracting and too influencing in different ways, or too disturbing.
Partly as a result, I think, of writing The Fine Art of Invisible Detection. I do read a certain amount of Japanese fiction. So that's been quite interesting. I'm into crime fiction, mystery fiction in general, from Japan. I've read quite a few of those lately.
How does it? I'm not familiar with a lot of Japanese fiction, although one of our key authors lives out in Japan and is quite strongly influenced. How does it compare? And what makes it so much more engaging, or is it just that?
I don't think it is necessarily more engaging. It's just that it draws you into a world you don't know very well. So there's that extra layer of engagement rather than a world that you are already familiar with.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of extra layer of surprise.
That's interesting, because escapism has always been a great part of reading for me, but not like escapism in a fantastical sense, just different places. I love to be taken somewhere else with it. Probably one of the reasons that I enjoyed this particular new release of yours so much, Robert, was that chance to go and meet new people and new times in, or experience new times in history, in that sense. So yeah.
I mean, it is quite a novelty, really, to use Algeria. For some reason, people have neglected the subject.
Yeah.
It's not something that would seem obviously to occur to people, but I think there are stories to be found everywhere. Wherever you go, there's a story.
Of course, and especially if you can interlink that with a history that has been hitherto broadly explored. All sorts of opportunities arising from that, I can only imagine. What are you reading at the moment, Robert? Is there anything that you're reading about? We have no genre on this one. This could just be whatever it is. We just like to find out what our favourite authors are reading.
Well, at the moment, I have to admit that at the moment I'm reading various Japanese books, which that might give you some insight into what's going on in terms of a future book.
Any titles you want to let us know?
I'm not really wildly keen about.
Oh no, not about your future book.
If in doubt, I always read a bit of Tanizaki. You just can't get any better than Tanizaki. Some of his books succeed on a level which is very difficult to describe, particularly his most famous work, Makioka Sisters, because it all takes place just as Japan is about to enter the Second World War, but that is never mentioned in the entire book. But it hangs over all of the action as a sort of unspoken threat to the characters, in a way which is really rather clever, and as a result, got the book banned by the authorities.
Even cleverer for having never
apparently it was patriotic. Take the subject seriously. He thought, I believe, that he would avoid getting into any trouble by simply writing a domestic setting. But they took this to be deliberately unpatriotic, and all the book was still banned. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's sensitivity and there's sensitivity. I've deliberately not mentioned it, and you still banned my book.
What about you, chaps? What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading Metronome.
Excellent. How's it going?
It's going good so far. I haven't had enough time to get into it, but I am away next week, so I'm hoping to take it with me in a time of absolute blissful reading pleasure.
Excellent. And that's by Tom Watson, isn't it?
It is Tom Watson, yes. I'd say this. I'm really, really looking forward to getting properly stuck into it. Just fiddling with the opening chapters.
Excellent stuff. And what about yourself, Chris?
I've just finished The North Water by Ian McGuire, which I said it in a text message to someone. I think it's in the top 5 books I've ever read.
Wow.
I absolutely love it. I started it on the train back from London on Friday and literally couldn't put it down, and finished it yesterday. And I've not started anything since because, I've kind of got that thing where that was so good that the next thing is going to be less good in my mind. So I want to choose carefully what it is, because I feel, you sort of feel bad for the next thing that comes along because you're like, well, you've got a lot to live up to. So I'm going to give it a few days, I think, and sort of try and let it go out of my mind a bit, and then be fairer on the next person, which I think, to be fair, is going to be The Botanist by Mike Craven. So, I mean, it's not going to be a bad follow-up.
Yeah, it'll probably be all right now. I was going to say, as long as you're not reading anything by me afterwards, that's fine. I'm good.
One of the authors that falls directly into the meh category.
Yes, please don't assign me meh just yet. For myself, I was very lucky to be sent a copy of Season in Exile by Oliver Harris, who this is the new Nick Belzy thriller. And the Belzy books, I absolutely loved. When I first started writing, they were something that, or took writing seriously, they were something that were like key texts for me in a way, just like, wow, they're really something to motivate and aim at and inspire, So I'm absolutely delighted that Ollie has sent me this. So thank you very much, Ollie. I appreciate that very much.
Really nice.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Robert. It's been lovely.
No, I'm impressed by all of your reading industry, because I can't match it.
With the novelty of getting sent books hasn't worn off for me yet, Robert. So just trying to funnel them in as quickly as possible.
I'm afraid I'm usually quite feeble when it comes to reading, just because there's not enough time in the day to devote to it with everything that I'm doing. But Rob and Chris seem to be able to devour books in days. It's never been this good of mine.
But it's been a real pleasure to chat with you tonight, Robert. Thank you so much for coming and joining us.
Thanks to you all. Thanks.
And all the very best with the new book.
Yes.
Thanks for all the inspiration.
Yeah, this is the night they come for you, listeners. It's out right now. Go get it. Fill your boots. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's actually, it's one of those stunning. When it arrived on my doorstep, it was one of those stunning books that I'm going to keep out and not put on a shelf. I'm going to keep it so that people can see that. So yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Papers, they really are.
Yeah,
brilliant
papers. Great.
Well, thanks very much. Lovely to
thank you.
Lovely to have met you tonight, Robert. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Are you a Bond fan? I mean, really a Bond fan.
If you enjoy dreaming of what 1991 and 1993 Tim Dalton films would have looked like,
or if you have a degree in Octopussy but still don't know which Fabergé egg is a fake,
then the Really 007 podcast is for you.
Really 007.
We bring an insightful,
critical, and silly take on the James Bond films.
We are proudly part of the Pod Dojo network and are available for free on iTunes and Spotify.
We have regular, in-depth reviews of every Bond film,
as well as special episodes on different aspects of the series.
And some of us are a bit down on the Craig era. Robert.
While others are happy to pretend to dislike things, just to get cheap laughs.
Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and join in on the James Bond conversation online.
Really 007.